I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 152 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Public Accounts.
In person, in the room, and remotely using the Zoom application. Before we begin, I'd like to ask all in-person participants to read the guidelines written on the updated cards on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including and especially our interpreters. A kind reminder to all those in person as well as online that for the safety of our interpreters, that it is very important that your microphone is muted when you are not speaking. A reminder that all comments should be addressed to the chair. Conformément à l'article 108.3G.
Pursuant to Standing Order 108.3G, the committee is continuing its study on Report 6, Sustainable Development Technology Canada, of the 2024 Reports 5 to 7 of the Auditor General of Canada.
As an individual, Annette Verschuren, an officer of the Order of Canada. Welcome, Ms. Verschuren. It's nice to have you here today, and you have 5 minutes for an opening remark. Just 1 second, Mr. Verschuren. Mr. Verschuren, I have a point of order. Yes, Mr. Brock.
A couple of issues, Chair. I noticed that during the audio check for Ms. Verschuren, there were a number of people in the room, the same room that she is in, and I'd like to have some clarification if they're still in the room and who those people are and whether or not they'll be communicating with her during her testimony.
I think those questions are, you can pose those questions, Mr. Brock, at the time. Just hold on a second, just 1 second. Yes, sorry about that. I just conferred with the clerk. Those are questions I'll allow you to pose during the questioning, Mr. Brock. I know that's been done before during question. I'll hear a point of order if you have further evidence I should consider.
I'm happy to do that, Chair. The second point of order that I had, or the second aspect of the first point of order, is that given the nature of the testimony, I'd be seeking unanimous consent to have the witness either sworn or affirmed to tell the truth.
All right. I'm going to confer with the clerk on that. Just 1 second, Mr. Brock. I'll come back to you. So, Mr. Brock, your request seeking UC is for the witness to either be sworn in or affirmed to tell the truth. This requires all member consent. Do I have consent for the clerk and I to put this into effect? Oui, Monsieur Drouin.
Mr. Chair, I obviously, I've sat on committees for 9 years now, and I know Mr. Brock is not fairly new, but hasn't been here for 9 years. I don't object to witnesses obviously telling the truth, but normally it's the normal practice for witnesses and the expectations that they would tell the truth, and there are other tools that we can use if we believe that members are not telling the truth. And I would also say that as we opine, as has been known as this committee, that members of Parliament also tell the truth in this committee. And I'd say we all sworn in to tell the truth. And so I certainly don't have an issue, but I would also ask the same of Mr. Brock, as he will opine on his questioning, to tell the truth as well.
Thank you. Well, sure. I was going to say that is noted, Mr. Drouin. I did not hear an objection from Mr. Drouin. I'm still going to seek for UC on that, but go ahead, Mr. Brock.
MP Brock and any other MP at this committee are not witnesses. We are members who are duly sworn to represent our particular ridings. We are on this committee to ask witnesses questions. His analogy would be akin to me going back to my old life and having a judge interrupt me in the middle of an examination in chief or a cross-examination and say, Mr. Brock, you need to be sworn in to tell the truth in the form of how you're going to pose the question. That is a ridiculous assessment by Monsieur Drouin. And either we had unanimous consent or not. Clearly, by his intervention, I think we don't have unanimous consent.
No,
but I'd like to hear that from
Mr.
him.
Brock, no, that's not what I heard. I'm going to call the question in a second here. In fact, I heard quite the opposite from Mr. Duran, but I'm going to make sure it's clear here in case I heard differently than you, Mr. Brock. I will say to the same thing I said to Mr. Duran, your point is noted. I am seeking unanimous consent for the witness to be sworn and or affirmed to tell the truth. Do I have that agreement from all members? Any dissent? All right, I'm going to suspend this meeting for a few minutes while the clerk and I prepare for this. This meeting is suspended for a couple of minutes. order. Mr. Dudurian, you had your hand up briefly, but I see it's down now, so very good. Then we will proceed, and I'm going to turn this over to the clerk, who will ask, who will run through this. So, Mrs. Verschuren, if we could have your attention, please.
Yes.
Do you swear that the evidence you shall give on this examination shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I, Annette Verschuren, do solemnly, sincerely, and truly affirm and declare that the evidence I shall give on this examination shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. I will now then turn it back over to you for any opening remarks. You have up to 5 minutes, please. You have the floor.
Mr. Chair, this is the 5th time I've appeared before a committee in relation to my work at SDTC. I've made a number of opening statements that are available online, should anyone want to read them. With that in mind, I'll just turn it over to you and the members for questions.
All right. Then I will begin to. We're going to try to get. We're going to get through 4 rounds today. The first round consists of 4 members, 6 minutes each. Mr. Perkins, you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Verschuren, for appearing again. Could I start by asking, earlier it appeared that there were 2 people in the room with you. Could you please share with the committee their names and what their roles are?
There's no one in the room with me now.
They're not there now. Okay.
No.
Thank you. So I would like to begin with some of your previous testimony in relation to questions I asked you. I asked you in your appointment process how it came about. I asked you if you had applied. You answered the question in committee, and then you sent a lawyer letter a week later. But the lawyer letter didn't really clarify things from the perspective I have. So you said, Ms. Verschuren, that you had never applied for any job in your life, including this one, and that Minister Baines had called you twice to ask you to do it. That's what you testified last time. Is that still true?
In my note, I clarified to the committee that I was approached. And
about your note, sorry, Ms. Verschuren, I didn't ask you about your note. I'll come to that, please.
I was approached to put my name forward for consideration, yes. And after a period of reflection, I decided to fill out the necessary documents and submit my application.
I think that is the 2 pieces that I think we're missing, because in Minister Baines' testimony and in the testimony of the head of the appointments for the Privy Council office, the Prime Minister's personal department, they said no one was contacted that hadn't applied first. But clearly, they had contacted you before you applied, is what you just testified.
Mr. Chair, during, I think, the summer or the spring, there were a couple of occasions where I would have been at a conference or, with the minister. And I think we discussed it at that stage.
That he phoned you, that it wasn't at a conference, that he actually called you twice. So on the first call, what did he ask and what was your response?
I don't recall if it was both telephone calls, quite frankly. I did receive a call from him. And again, he said, Annette, you'd be extraordinarily qualified to take on this position, and talked a little bit about the role of SDTC. And
so then you gave it some consideration, and either you or he had another communication by phone, presumably to discuss whether or not what your decision was. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that when I decided that I was going to apply, we had a conversation.
it's very interesting, and I believe that the testimony that you are giving right now is the truthful testimony, and I believe that the testimony reflects that Minister Bain's testimony was actually not truthful. That former Liberal Minister Bains, when he appeared, said that he never called anybody that wasn't on the list provided by PCO. So it's very clear that they called you first, then asked you to apply, then the PCO list came about those to be considered. And I believe, Mr. Chair, that that's something that's going to require reflection of this committee, that we had a former Minister of the Crown, I believe, that just lied before the committee about the appointment process and what was done. He said that very clearly, although many other things he couldn't remember, but he remembered that clearly, that he didn't do anything that somebody else didn't tell him to do, and that somebody else was the Prime Minister's department, the PCO. So that was actually a lie to this committee. Ms. Verschaeren, when you took this position, which of course is not something that you do for pay, as we know, on government GIC appointments, the issue of the fact that NR Store, which you founded and owned, had already been doing business with SDTC, the Liberal Green Slush Fund. In fact, Leah Lawrence, who you inherited as the CEO, had warned Minister Bain's office and his former PMO staffer under Prime Minister Trudeau that was working on government and communications for SDTC, also warned the minister's department that somebody who had a conflict should not be appointed. Ms. Lawrence testified before committee that you were the first chair appointed to this body that actually had been doing business with this body since it was founded in 2001. Why did you think, and I don't care about the ethics commissioner discussion, why did you think personally that it was okay for you to take on a job with a company, with an organization that was doing millions of dollars of business with NR Store, which you own?
Mr. Chair, during the application process, I declared this conflict. I had declared this conflict to the ethics commissioner, to the conflict commissioner, to ISED, to everybody that that was responsible. I did not know that that Ms. Lawrence approached and called the minister on this.
Thank you very much. That is your time, Mr. Perkins. Next is Ms. Bradford. You have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mrs. Verschuren, for being with us by video today. Conservatives would have us believe that you're a Liberal insider, but in fact, you've equally served Conservative governments. You were tapped by Prime Minister Mulroney to serve on his National Science and Technology Committee. Can you speak to the work that you did under this committee for the Mulroney government?
Mr. Chair, honourable member, I worked with the Prime Minister was the chair of that committee, and we worked across border with U.S. counterparts. There was a Science and Technology Committee set up by the Bush administration, I think at the time, and we met over a period of 2 or 3 years. To share ideas, work together, promote business and trade, and through the acceleration of science and technology.
And Finance Minister Flaherty tapped you as an economic advisor to serve on his Economic Council during the 2008 recession. Can you speak to the work that you were doing under Minister Jim Flaherty?
I was a member of I think there were about 15 of us across the country that was advising the minister to respond to the economic crisis of 2008, 2009. And this committee made recommendations to the minister on how we should respond in this recession to bring back the economy. And so we presented short-term recommendations and longer-term recommendations. It was a pretty big infrastructure program that crossed the country at the time to really stimulate growth, and so did that for about 12 to 14 months.
Any other work in an advisor role or any similar capacity for any other Conservative PM or minister over the last 20 years?
For Prime Minister Harper, I worked with him on the Science and Technology Council, worked with him on North American free trade, went with him to Cancun to represent Canada to promote trade. So yeah, I did a number of those things with Prime Minister Stephen Harper.
So a mission to Cancun with the Prime Minister to promote trade with Mexico?
No.
Like, were there any other department people on that? Was it a trade mission, or?
It was a decision where President Fox, President Bush, and Prime Minister Stephen Harper came together to say, look, what can we do to promote trade? So there were 10 business people from each country talking about ways we can reduce barriers to increase trade between our countries. And it was about an hour meeting, and it was part of North American free trade discussions and promotion.
Where would that have been?
That would have been, God, I don't remember the year, 2000, I'm not sure.
Have you taken any such role with any provincial governments in the last 20 years?
I helped work on an industry committee with, God, I forget the name of the minister, in the Wynne government here in Ontario a number of years ago.
What did you do with the Wynne government? What was your role and your capacity?
Advising on the economy and finding ways to increase productivity and employment.
Now, multiple witnesses, including officials in the former Ministry of Industry, have stated it is customary for departments to send out mass emails to stakeholders once PCO post appointment openings. The department stated it likely sent out such an email. Given your history working with the Government of Canada, as you previously stated, and even serving more recently on the Clean Tech Strategy Table, do you remember receiving an email once the position was posted online around September 2018?
I honestly don't remember, Mr. Chair.
You don't recall whether you got such an email?
No.
Okay. If you don't recall, could you come back to the committee in writing with a response? Maybe check your notes and see?
Yes, I will.
Okay. The Ethics Commissioner has made it clear that this was a technical violation of the Act. How much would you have personally benefited from any of the funding that was approved by the board in which you had a conflict and did not recuse yourself? And what was your total stake in those approved projects?
Other than the project that I declared at the time of my chairmanship, I was not involved, had no financial involvement in any project that came before SDTC.
And that is the time, Ms. Bradford. Suivant, c'est Madame.
Next, we have Ms. Sinclair Degagné and Ms. Verschoen.
Madame Sinclair Degagné, vous avez 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
6 minutes. Ms. Sinclair Degagné. Thank you, Chair. Ms. Verschoen, thank you for being here with us today. You were in attendance at other committees, but it's your first appearance before PACP and our study on Sustainable Development Technology Canada. Ms. Verschuren, you've spent much of your career helping businesses grow, be it in the area of sustainable development or not. And in the case of SDTC, we find it a pity that SDTC has disappeared, knowing that it was funding projects that were very useful for the future of Quebec and Canada. In that regard, I have a series of questions. I would appreciate if your answers were brief, Ms. Verschuren, because I have numerous questions to ask you. Ms. Verschuren, are you an investor in the Sandpiper Venture Capital Fund?
I am.
Sandpiper investit.
Sandpiper invests in companies such as Denova or Connor Smith. Is that a fact?
Ces entreprises.
These businesses are a part of the Verschuren Center. Is that correct? And they also receive funds from the Verschuren Center.
Verschuren Center is a non-for-profit organization where the STTC provided funds to entrepreneurs or companies associated with that. And I don't recall these organizations during my tenure.
D'accord.
As a matter of fact,
Je vais reposer la question. Excusez-moi, je vais reposer.
I'm going to ask the question differently. Denova needed bioreactors and contributed some $500,000 in the bioreactors project. So it is a company associated with the Verschuren Center.
Yes, it is a
Parfait.
company that, yes.
Donc, si je.
So if I've understood correctly, and I sum up, Ms. Verschuren, you have personal interest in a venture capital risk fund that invests in companies that are growing and that are also receiving public funding from the government, that is, whereas you have private interests in that Sandpiper Investment Fund. So when you say there was no financial connection with these companies that were being funded by the Verschuren Center, are you setting aside the possibility that was an indirect vector, that is, the Sandpiper Fund?
I'd have to take a look back at the timing of when I invested in that Sandpiper Fund. But I did check at the time, and there were no conflicts in the Sandpiper Fund that STTC funded.
D'accord. Je parle de manière.
Very well, but I was talking in a more general way, not just STTC, because as you know, a conflict of interest could also be exercising certain authority, the fact of being the chairperson of a board. I'm sorry, I can't even hear myself speak. As I was saying, in the case of your chairing the board, you could have, through different vectors, obtain funds, and I will come back to this, obtain funds for different projects, be they projects like Denova, which are in your investment portfolio, because you invest in Sandpiper, and those companies are in Sandpiper's portfolio and indirectly in your personal portfolio. And I could come back to this. It was during the time you were chair of the board, and there was the bioreactor project, which was necessary, if I've understood, for the development of Nova. Precisely, that was in the Sandpiper portfolio. So the bioreactor project, you put in an application for SDTC, and I have the documents equivalent to $2.5 million. And 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 obviously it was denied because of a big conflict of interest. But Mr. Durham asked all the members of the team to make every effort to find you some funding. So you received at the Verschuren Center for that project almost 11 million, and I have the details here with me. 2 million from, sorry, let me look. 2.5 million from Nova Scotia and 2 million from Andrew Nursworth and also from Engine, totaling some 7 million. And then in 2023, 925,000 from Forestry Industry Transition Trust, also Nova Scotia government, and then another and 1.5 million for the Canadian Food Innovation Network, funded by the Strategic Innovation Fund. Your question, please. Now, your bioreactor project, for which did you had indirect interests and got public funding, so you benefited from your friendship with Andrew Noseworthy and your position as chair of the board to enrich yourself and Sandpiper and enrich your personal interests.
I'll go back to the Verschuren Center is a non-for-profit eco-center that was sponsoring entrepreneurs and companies to grow their organizations. There was no investment no investment by me personally, no investment at all directly or indirectly.
Thank you very much. That's the time we have, Madame Secretary. Our next witness, Mr. Cannings, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. And as I think we've already established, I'm not a witness. But I'm very happy that Ms. Verschuren is here before us today, and I thank you for being here, and I appreciate that you appeared before other committees on this. I'm new to this committee. I'm new to this file and this issue, so forgive me if I go over some ground that you've gone over, and I've asked forgiveness of my committee colleagues if I go over some ground that you've already heard. But I'm just trying to get a grasp on this important situation. The way I understand it, we had the Conflict and Ethics Commissioner released a report, the Verschuren report, back in July, which found that you, Ms. Verschuren, had failed to comply with the decision-making and duty to recuse parts of the Conflict of Interest Act in parts of your actions around SDTC. I don't, I'm not an expert in conflict of interest. I did sit on a couple of administrative tribunals where I did receive training from judges on what conflict of interest was, and as I remember, the most important thing was the perception of a conflict of interest, what the person on the street would think if presented with facts of a case, is that person in conflict? And, the main thing was to recognize these, when I was sitting on a panel to then make the right decision, whether to recuse myself from a proceeding. There wasn't so much, it was mostly recusal in that case. But so it seems that you did declare potential conflict to the Board of Directors, and you abstained from voting on most of these funding decisions that involved SDTC and the Verschuren Center and Mars. But and you did abstain from voting on most of these decisions, and on 4 occasions, it seems that you didn't abstain from making from those decisions, and you did not recuse yourself in any of these cases. So I'm just trying to figure out what your personal policy or the policy of the Board of Directors was on how you handled these conflict of interest decisions? When did you decide to recuse yourself from the discussion? Did you ever leave the room, or did you just not take part? And when did you decide that you would not vote? It seems very important. I guess I'm having a hard time deciding or understanding what your decision-making process was around those conflict of interest situations.
Thank you for the question. The Ethics Commissioner found that I took what I believed at the time to be proper steps, and that I believed at the time that I had acted within the bounds of the Act. I really did. But there were there were two things that he talked about. He said, I was led astray in terms of the lack of consistency in decision-making process at STTC somewhat, but I really declared conflicts. One of the things that I should have done better is, instead of abstaining, I should have recused myself, but that was the process that was established and what I followed at STTC. I accept the Ethics Commissioner's findings, but he also found that there was no evidence that I attempted to influence the decisions of my colleagues on the STTC board.
So, if I understand you correctly, you were following sort of a general procedure that the board used, but that procedure, for whatever reason, seems to have run afoul of the Conflict of Interest Act, according to the Conflict and Ethics Commissioner, because, as you mentioned, he did point out that you failed to comply with that act on some occasions, especially around non-recusal. But there were, as I say, there were 4 decisions where you were making a decision on funding companies that, were involved with the Verschuren Center and Mars, and you even voted on those. Was there a difference in those situations? Do you recall why you would vote on those, and for the most part, you did not vote on the others?
Look, it was clear that I made some mistakes, and I should have recused myself where I abstained. And in a couple of occasions, it wasn't recorded that I did that. And so, yes, there were areas that I should have been, more on top of, and declared these things faster. And these were all, I think, perceived conflicts as well. And so that was where I should have been more particular and more detailed, and I didn't follow the process.
Thank you. That is the time, Mr. Cannings. Turning now, beginning our second round, which will consist of 6 members of various times. Mr. Brock, you're leading us off for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your attendance again, Ms. Verschuren. There's a couple of loose ends that I want to pick up on from the first round with my colleague, Mr. Perkins. Through information received from the head of the appointment process at the PCO, Donalyn McClymont, we received certain information with respect to the process, the recruitment process, the actual hiring. So it would appear that applications were received by the PCO on the 12th of October, 2018. 56 applicants had applied. The PCO interviewed 8 to March the 15th of 2019. Of those 8, 5 were recommended to be reviewed by Minister Baines at that time. However, none of those 5 passed whatever sort of threshold test Minister Baines had applied, because during that interim period, from October of 2018 to May 2nd, 2019, another 47 applicants had applied. It was shortlisted to 16. 3 were ultimately interviewed. You were part of that process. In fact, you had applied after your conversation or conversations with Minister Baines on April 30th, 2019. So a total of 6 recommendations were sent to Minister Baines. So now, with that timeline in place, as to the best of your recollection, when do you recall first receiving that phone call from Minister Baines? And if it wasn't from Minister Baines, was it from someone from his office? Explain that process to us, please.
Mr. Chair, I don't recall the date of when I received that phone call. I don't recall the date of that.
Applied on April the 30th, 2019. Was it the day before? Was it a week before? Was it a month before? Does that help you recollect? Your application was filed April 30th, 2019.
Yeah. I don't recall.
Okay.
But
And was this just a cold call out of the blue? You picked up the phone rang, and hi there, Ms. Verschaeren, this is Minister Baines. I have something to present to you. Was it something like that, or was there a process? Was there an email? Was there a letter that set up a specific time that he wanted to reach out to you? What can you recall about the process?
the process wasn't, it was probably, it was in the context of advice I was giving to him as part of industry, his industry portfolio. And I think he did talk to me once outside of a telephone call. And I do not recall what he said at that time.
Well, it must have been flattering to you that he would consider you for this very important position. You clearly indicated you wanted some time to think about it. Was there more than one phone call from Minister Baines, again, highly recommending to you that you apply for this position? Was there more than once? Because I got the impression when you initially testified at a different committee that it was possibly up to 3 different phone calls, maybe 2 to 3 different phone calls, and that you ultimately made the decision to apply. Does that refresh your memory?
I think that there could have been a couple of occasions that he brought this up outside of a telephone call. I was involved with some events that he was at, and so it was a general conversation.
I'm running out of time. I want to ask one last question.
Briefly.
Did you declare your conflict with respect to the SDTC during any of those conversations with Minister Baines before you filed your application, yes or no?
Mr. Chair, I don't recall talking specifically about that conflict, no.
Thank you very much. Suivant, c'est M. Drouin joining us.
Next, Mr. Drouin.
For 5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you also to our witness before us today for, I think, the 4th or 5th time that she appears before a parliamentary committee. And I want to underscore that it might seem bizarre to my Conservative colleagues that there's, a process for appointments to public boards. But we in our party don't, bring in former candidates that I think was mentioned with regard to Gary Long, who was a minister and lost his election in 2011 and suddenly ended up on a committee. But Ms. Verschuren, I don't want to dwell on what happened in the past, but your relationship, and I refer to the Ethics Commissioner's report, but your relationship with North Star, before that company got funding, did you receive any dividends or any kinds of payments, any kind of payment from that company?
From the investment that I had in our store from that project.
Oui, exactement.
Yeah.
Ouais.
Yes, exactly.
Puis,
I did not receive any dividends, no, or any profit.
OK. Et est-ce que vous avez...
All right. Now, did you get any profits once SDTC decided to go ahead with the funding of that company? Did you get any kind of premium, or was it? Did you ever get anything in addition after?
Mr. Chair, that project did not provide any returns to NR Store, but it was successful in terms of commercialization.
D'accord. Puis, toute la...
Thank you. Now, all of the questions around the Verschuren Center, did you get any personal profits out of that not-for-profit organization? Did you have an expense account? Did you receive any payments or a salary from that not-for-profit prior it getting funding?
Mr. Chair, I have never received. I've never received any fees, any salaries. I don't think I ever put in an expense account to the Verschuren Center.
D'accord. Puis, est-ce que vous...
Very well. Now, subsequent to the Verschuren Center having success with the SDTC and the Mars Center, which I know very well, did you receive an expense account with the Mars Center? Any fees or any payments?
Mars, like the Verschuren Center, is a non-for-profit organization, and I've never received any fees. I don't think I ever submitted an expense account for Mars either.
D'accord. Et suite au...
All right, then. Now, subsequent to the success of the SDTC that confirmed funding with either the Verschuren Center or Mars, did you ever get any fees or bigger expense account or any payments subsequently?
Mr. Chair, I never received any financial, nothing financially from those two organizations.
D'accord. Donc...
All right, then. So the commissioner indicated that in some cases you recused yourself and you should have abstained. Now, you've recognized that. Now, if you were to begin over again, what would you do differently to ensure that you did indeed respect the Conflict of Interest Act?
I, of course, based upon the study done by the Ethics Commissioner, I accepted his recommendations, and I certainly would have recused instead of abstained from those projects. I did abstain in most of them. I just did not recuse myself. And so the procedure was set up in such a way that management recommended this, and so I followed that. But that that was a mistake that I learned, and I would absolutely make sure I followed that precisely.
Et voilà, merci beaucoup.
And thank you very much. And now, Madame Sinclair de Gagné. An order, please, Mr. Perkins, Mr. Cooper, because it is Ms. Sinclair de Gagné's turn to take the floor. Ms. Verschuren, I would like to continue on the topic of the bioreactor. You filed a funding request for the bioreactor. And in your funding request to SDTC for this bioreactor, we see that fundamentally it's a question of equipment. And the equipment's value is some $2.5 million. If you look at the project in total, including the electrical installation, the grand total of the project, and I have the figures before me, approximately $6 million. Nonetheless, when you look at the figures that the bioreactor received, and I mentioned these earlier, it's close to $11 million. Ms. Verschuren, what happened? What did you do with the $11 million of public money for a bioreactor, which only cost $6 million?
Mr. Chair, I did not apply for any monies for the Verschuren Center. The CEO did. I was not operating that organization. I was a board member, and so this is a matter associated with the existing organization.
Êtes-vous en train de dire que vous n'avez aucun...
Are you telling me that you had no say in what went on at the Verschuren Center that bears your name? Are you saying that you did not know what's going on at the Verschuren Center? Because that is problematic.
As a board member, absolutely, we were involved in the strategy of the organization and received budgets.
Donc, je vais reposer ma question très précise. Le projet de bioréacteur coûtait 6,5 millions de dollars. Le centre Verschuren en a reçu.
The Verschuren Center got more than $11 million. What happened with the public taxpayers' money, Ms. Verschuren?
Verschuren Center is a non-for-profit organization, and it's funding the support of the ecosystem, and it is building these organizations to create commercial support in the ecosystems, and the organization is supporting a lot of companies.
Madame Verschuren, je suis vraiment abasourdie par l'absence de réponse.
I'm really shocked by the absence of response to a very simple and direct question, especially when you think that the Verschuren Center does not have any public annual reporting and receives public money. It's impossible for taxpayers to know where the money went. And I was expecting an answer from you. I'm disappointed that I did not get one.
Et voilà, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Jennings, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. I'm going to switch my focus now to some of the criteria used in making these decisions, trying to understand how those decisions were made at the board level. For instance, the Auditor General found that 8 of the projects that we're talking about here today, totaling $51 million, so these are not insignificant projects, didn't meet the eligibility criteria, presumably the criteria developed as part of the SDTC and what the goals of that organization were. For example, some of the projects didn't support the development or demonstration of a new technology, and that's, to my understanding, kind of one of the raison d'etres of this organization. Or the projected environmental benefits, the sustainable technology benefits were unreasonable. And so I guess my question would be, why were these types of projects funded if they didn't meet those criteria? What went into that? And well, I'll let you just answer that question, and I might have a follow-up.
Mr. Chair, the projects, management would make recommendations for projects to be approved through a rigorous analysis, and then it would be presented to the board. And again, I was not part of the management team. Management would make recommendations to the board. And, it's my understanding that many of the Auditor General's recommendations are already, and I see that from media, has been adopted by the STTC organization. So again, these decisions were supported and made by management and recommended to the board.
So what, if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is perhaps things might have been too loose and lax in those decisions, and after the Auditor General report, the STTC management, the people sort of doing the grunt work and assessing these projects have changed their ways, have changed the methods that they use to decide whether projects can be funded as a result of that. So, mistakes were made and we've learned from it. Is that what you're saying?
The Auditor General's report was very broad, and it was over a scope of time where I wasn't there as well. And so I think it's really hard for me to comment on these management processes, and I think that the organization's making the necessary step to make changes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cooper, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Verschuren, the Auditor General's report found that the conflict of interest policy for directors at SDTC did not comply with the SDTC Act. Specifically, it did not comply with respect to Section 12.2 of the Act that states unequivocally that board members shall not profit or gain any income from the foundation. You were the chair of the board. Can you explain how the board adopted and maintained a conflict of interest policy that did not comply with the SDTC Act?
Mr. Chair, I believe that all office holders owe Canadians a commitment to accountability, and I've been accountable. I resigned as the board chair.
Ms. Verschuren, with the greatest respect, that was not my question. My question is, how is it that the SDTC board had a conflict of interest policy in place that didn't comply with the Act? And here's what this unlawful so-called conflict of interest policy allowed board members to do. And this is right from paragraph 6.46 of the Auditor General's report. Board members were allowed under the policy to buy or sell securities in companies who were funding recipients of SDTC as soon as 3 days after a public announcement of a funding decision. So how was that allowed to stand?
Mr. Chair, those were the procedures. Those are the procedures at the time. And I...
Sharon, here's the situation we have. The SDTC board could approve funding for a company on Monday, and then on Thursday, board members could buy or sell shares in that very same company. Do you know what that is? It's insider trading, isn't it?
Mr. Chair, those processes were in place when I arrived as chair. And so this was the
They
recommendation
remained in place.
made by,
For 5 years, you were
Yes.
the chair, and for 5 years, they remained in place. And you did nothing about it, did you? And Leah Lawrence, the CEO at the time, went to you and said the conflict of interest guidelines or policy as it pertains to the board need to be strengthened, and you kiboshed efforts to strengthen those conflict of interest policies to bring them in line with the Act and to end the insider trading. Isn't that right?
I followed what I believed and recommended by independent legal advice.
Is that the independent legal advice of the conflicted Ed Vandenberg? Is that the legal advice that you received? Is that your excuse?
And from the management team, that was the way in which these.
Well, it's very interesting because at SDTC, there was a conflict of interest policy for staff. Staff, quite appropriately, were prohibited from investing in a company funded by SDTC for 5 years following a project's completion. 5 years. And yet board members could invest in companies 3 days after a public announcement of a funding decision was made. How do you explain that?
Mr. Chair, the procedures were those that I followed. And
Those were ones that facilitated insider trading. And you know what the explanation is? That the board that you chaired was corrupt from top to bottom. And by the way, Ms. Verschuren, you've sat as a director on publicly traded companies, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
And you know full well that pursuant to the rules on insider trading and self-dealing from the Ontario Securities Commission, that directors can't purchase shares in the company in which they sit as a director on within days of a public announcement. You know that you can't do that, right?
Mr. Chair, I believe that I
asked you. You know that that's not the case. You can't do that.
Mr. Cooper, your time is up. I'm going to allow the witness to answer. So, Ms. Verschuren, you have the floor.
Certainly the procedures were established when I got there and continued. And I think
big green gravy train.
I'm going to move on now. Ms. Yip, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Verschuren, for coming today. Would you like to finish answering the question?
No, I think it's not necessary. I think I have tried to establish.
She's admitted her guilt.
Okay,
Mr. Cooper, your time is up. Yes, Ms. Yip, you have the floor.
Do you recognize that your lack of recusals have impacted the industry, leaving small businesses and innovators in a vulnerable position? Do you have any comment?
I'm very concerned about the clean tech industry, and I understand that a lot of the recommendations made by the AG have been changed and asserted. Absolutely, I hope that SDTC remains a strong organization. I'm really happy that NRC is taking it over, and so I really do hope that things will continue, because it is the future of our economy in terms of growth.
Do you have other comments regarding the Auditor General's recommendations?
The Auditor General's recommendations were broad in scope. It focuses on the history of SDTC and the Act, and it focuses in in part on the decisions of management, and I was not part of the management team. From what I've seen in the media, it's my understanding the STC has already adopted most of the Auditor General's recommendations.
How do you view the project review? Review that is underway by the Transition Board? What are your thoughts?
I believe that due diligence is being done. The accountability is underway in terms of making sure that proper procedures are completed and executed.
Would you agree that the clean tech industry heavily relies on government funding to de-risk investment?
Yes, these entrepreneurs take risks and need to be supported, and is part of the chain of our new technology and innovation in our country. So critically important that we have this support for this sector.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Yip. Beginning our third round now, Mr. Nader, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you, thank you to our witness for joining us here today. Ms. Verschaeren, do you know who Andrew Noseworthy is?
Yes, I know who Andrew Noseworthy is.
So earlier this week, we had former Deputy Minister Newbley here, who used the phrase that Andrew Noseworthy was his, quote, eyes and ears on the SDTC board. Would you agree with that assessment of Mr. Noseworthy, that he was the eyes and ears of the industry department on the SDTC board?
I would agree with that assessment.
Okay. So my understanding is that Mr. Noseworthy attended nearly all, if not all, SDTC meetings. Is that your understanding as well? Was he at nearly all such meetings?
Yes, Mr. Chair, he was at, I would say, most meetings.
Okay.
Most board of directors meetings, yes.
Okay. So we've established that he was the eyes and ears of the department. He was sent there specifically by the Deputy Minister to be the eyes and ears. So now I'm curious, what was the role he actually played in those meetings? Did he at any point make note of the fact that there were problems with the conflict of interest? Did he raise any concerns about recusals versus abstentions? What was he saying at those meetings?
He participated, and I would often ask him to talk about, ISID's direction and his response to the performance of STTC.
So he was. Sorry, go ahead.
So he never questioned the procedures at the board level.
Okay, so we established that Mr. Noseworthy did not make note of the conflicts of interest or raise those issues. But I want to follow up. So he was basically providing the SDTC board with the direction from Industry Canada, what Industry Canada wished to see at SDTC. Is that my understanding?
He was, obviously, Mr. Noseworthy was the representative of ISID, and it was important to, have that relationship between ISID and the board of directors and management. And he would work with the CEO often to talk about, new ideas or initiatives that SDTC may have.
Okay. In the time since you've left the board, have you had any further contact with ADM Noseworthy?
I have not.
Okay. I want to go back to the selection process. Our understanding is that you applied to be the chair on April 30th of 2019, and I think we've established that prior to that, you had received at least one, sounds like two, phone calls from Minister Baines and perhaps other discussions with the former minister at perhaps public events or receptions of some sort. When you applied, were you aware that the Privy Council office had determined, and I'm reading this from Privy Council office, quote, the committee agreed that all 7 individuals are strong and that they also represented unique strengths that could serve the interests, current needs, and future direction of the SDTC. So that's referring to the highly qualified individuals that had applied prior to those phone calls. Were you aware that there were other individuals at that time who were deemed to be, quote, highly qualified for the position of chair and for positions on the board?
Mr. Chair, as I indicated, I did not look for this position, but when, and I was approached, after reflection, I did apply for that. I had no knowledge of who the other applicants were. I had no knowledge, quite frankly, of the process itself.
Sure. Thank you. Did the minister at any point note why specifically you were being encouraged?
I think the minister recognized my business experience, my focus and interest in the clean technology area that I had committed to push this industry forward in everything I did.
And that is your time, Mr. Nader. Beginning next is Mr. Erskine Smith joining us online. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. This committee has been marked by a series of conservative fishing expeditions, from what I can tell. And I want to start with the first one, which is this assessment by my conservative colleagues without any clear evidence, but they keep asking questions on this front, that there's some cozy relationship between yourself and then Minister Baines, and that you weren't appointed because of your experience, your background, and on the merits. So what was your relationship to Mr. Baines before your appointment? Were you friends? Let's start with that. Were you friends?
No, I knew him as a minister of ISED, of industry. No.
How many times would you have spoken to him in the course of in the course of your life? How many times would you have spoken to him before you ultimately applied?
3 or 4 or 5.
So you speak to this person 4 or 5 times. He's not your friend. You know him in this official capacity as the minister. And I'm supposed to believe, sitting here without any additional evidence, that there's some cozy relationship and he's installing you there for some purpose. That's what I'm supposed to believe. What am I to make of that?
Mr. Chair, when I was asked to become the chair, I really reflected on, on this, and I think I wanted to do what's right for the country and for this sector. Whether it was another minister, it wouldn't have made a difference to me. It wouldn't have made a difference if it was a Conservative minister or an NDP minister. I work for my country.
So let's get to the second fishing expedition that we've seen at various points in this committee, which is there's some kind of corruption at issue that you are self-dealing. Now, you have acknowledged, and the ethics commissioner has found 2 ethics violations. One in relation to the failure to recuse. You abstained, but you failed to recuse yourself in relation to the Verschuren Center. Of course, though, there was no pecuniary interest, so there's no self-dealing, there's no financial interest on that front. On the second front, there was the blanket COVID payment.
Yes.
And so there was an improper decision there as well, on the basis, though, as I understand it, of incorrect legal advice that you were relying upon corporate counsel. Is there any other instance that I should know about, that this committee should know about, that the Canadian public should know about, where you have financially benefited from decisions made at SDTC that you involved yourself in?
I have not benefited financially, and I think that as I've stated in another appearances, I accept the findings of the ethics commissioner. I really do, and he accepts that I properly sought legal advice, guidance to ensure my compliance, and what he saw is that at the time
you should have had a better lawyer. You should have had a better lawyer. Okay, so I want to get to the third and most recent fishing expedition. It's the first time I've heard it in countless hours of testimony. The first time I've heard it, it was just a minute ago from Mr. Cooper, where he basically accuses you of criminal conduct and insider trading. He might not know that insider trading is based on confidential information, not public information. But regardless, are you aware of at any point in time any insider trading that took place at SDTC by the board of directors, by any of your colleagues on the board?
I do not recall, or I never saw that there was any insider trading. And one of the things that the commissioner brought to my attention in the report, he said there's no evidence that I attempted to influence the decisions of my colleagues on STTC boards, which was...
Well, we've received no evidence of insider trading. It's the first I've heard of it. And from a guy who doesn't even know what it is. So my last question to you, and this is you've served for conservative prime ministers. You've served for conservative finance ministers. What do you make of the fact that a whole slew of current conservative MPs have sought to besmirch your character, engage in character assassination, accuse you of corruption, accuse you of insider trading? What do you make of this? You've served your country. You've served conservative prime ministers. What do you make of this current conservative party?
Mr. Chair, I can't comment on that, but I go back to the fact that I believe all office holders owe Canadians a commitment to accountability. And I've been accountable. I resigned, I accepted responsibility, I immediately accepted the report of the ethics commissioner. I've appeared 5 times at the committees like this one, and every step I've made decisions that have demonstrated my commitment to accountability. And I don't know what else.
Thank you very much. Suivant, c'est Madame Sinclair de...
Next, Ms. Sinclair Desgagne.
Down before we begin. 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Madame Verschuren.
2 minutes, 30 seconds. Thank you very much. Ms. Verschuren, let's get back to your relationship with Mr. Noseworthy. For how many years did you know Mr. Noseworthy?
Mr. Chair, I would have known Mr. Noseworthy for perhaps 10 years.
D'accord, merci. Monsieur Noseworthy.
Thank you. Mr. Noseworthy had a role to play with your appointment as chair, because there was conversations with Ms. Lawrence about your application. He announced to Ms. Lawrence, despite her reservations, that you would become the chair of the board of SDTC. And if I look more carefully, there are a number of government expenditures linked to Mr. Noseworthy. If you look at specific amounts, almost $6 million that you would have received from government organizations where Mr. Noseworthy was working. So CNRC, ACOA, all organizations where Mr. Noseworthy, in addition to being on the board and the eyes and ears of the government. So what could you say about a close ties between you and Mr. Noseworthy and the Verschuren Center, which bears your name?
I've known Mr. Noseworthy for a number of years and worked with him on various reports and committees, and have given him advice over the years. I have never talked with him about the Verschuren Center on any projects to do with the Verschuren Center. That again was something I just did not do.
Donc, comme Monsieur.
So when Mr. Ram, for instance, in regard to the Verschuren Center, mentioned that you are not entitled to direct funding because you sat as the chair of the board, but he gave SDT resources for you to find funding, and that the funding came from ACOA, the CNRC and the Department of Innovation directly or indirectly. And I gave examples earlier, either through the Innovation Strategic Fund or Engine that got money directly from innovation. But there's no ties between you and Mr. Nosler. Never had any conversations about getting that funding. They just appeared in the account of the Verschuren Center.
Mr. Chair, I never talked to Andy Noseworthy about any financial support for the Verschuren Center. The CEO and management of that organization would have pursued that. And so, that's all I can say.
Et merci beaucoup.
And thank you very much. Now, Mr. Boulris, 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Thank you very much, Chair. Ms. Verschuren, it's the first time I speak with you, but I cannot help but say how your actions have plunged us in a crisis. It's given rise to a scandal. We have a procedural blockage because of the Liberal stubbornness and the official opposition's stubbornness, and all Canadians are paying the price for this because for weeks we have not discussed any bills, nor the budget, and I only hope that you are aware of that. Last December 14th, in response to my colleague, Ms. Mask, projects were examined by a board of directors. The VP for investments made a recommendation. Sometimes people left the room. We all left the room when the project was discussed and decided on, and we would come back once a decision was made, but we did not know what the decision was until Sustainable Development Technology announced it the next day. But whistleblower number 1 stated that the application process for the Verschuren Center, staff complained on numerous occasions, even electronically to management, saying it was an obvious conflict of interest, but the issue was never listened to by management. We were always ignored until the issue was raised before the board, and other members of the board finally admitted that it was an obvious conflict of interest. Even after the demand was rejected, staff had to personally turn to other federal and provincial funding agencies and use the reputation of technologists to see if they were willing to give funding to the Verschuren Center. So regarding your erroneous testimony, either the whistleblower is lying, but how can you reconcile these two statements? Because they can't coexist in the same universe.
The Minister, Mr. Chair, I think the process that the member described, certainly was that I declared a conflict on the Verschuren Center immediately, in writing to all those involved. So I never had a discussion with management about that because I had to recuse myself. And so it wasn't until I got a call that the board had decided that project was not going to be going forward. So the board made the right decision.
Oui, mais ma question, madame, c'était.
Yes, but my question is that employees said the contrary. There were pressures exerted on the employees by staff, by managers, and that completely contradicts what your assertion that everything ran smoothly according to the rules.
Mr. Chair, I did not know about these accusations and these comments, and again, this was something that I think management was dealing with.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Suivant, vous auriez encore une.
So, next, and Mr. Boulris, you will have another opportunity to ask questions. Yes. With the next round. Next, Mr. Perkins.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am going to follow up on the questions of my previous two colleagues from the Bloc and the NDP, but I would like to follow up on something I asked you earlier. In the timeline on your appointment, when you sought advice from the Ethics Commissioner on your conflict of interest in assuming this position, the conflict of interest being that the board that you were about to chair of the organization that was already lending or granting money to your company, was that after you had accepted the position in your conversations with Minister Bains?
I believe it was done absolutely before I was appointed, and it was done. It was done in the I think it was a few days before.
You applied. Somewhere in that neighborhood you applied,
yeah.
But after okay. I'd like to follow up on the questions. So you sat on the board of the Fischerin Center, and did you sit on the board of Sandpiper as well?
No, I did not.
Okay, but you are an investor in Sandpiper, and you sit on the board of the Fischerin Center, did at the time?
That's correct.
At the time you were chairing the SDTC board. Correct?
I'm trying to remember when I became an investor in Sandpiper, but
okay, I'll come back to that. So the Fischerin Center sought $6.8 million from SDTC, and they did that without consulting the board of the Fischerin Center? Because when I look at the cash flow statements and the income statement of the Fischerin Center from the time, it appears that it was in desperate need of this money.
I declared conflicts at the board of the Fischerin Center on anything to do with SDTC.
That wasn't my question, though. It did go through the board. So when it went to the board investment committee on January 13th, the minutes, January 13th, 2022, the minutes rejected it, as you say, for all the reasons of conflict of interest. And the minutes say that SDTC would shift its efforts in discussion with other potential funding sources and hope that the diligence conducted to date can be transformed into another funding agency. And that was in January. And in June, ACOA gave the Fischerin Center $2 million. And so on. For the next couple of months, another $4.2 million was given by other government agencies, another $1 million in September by ACOA, another $3.1 million by ISED, which Mr. Noseworthy acted for, and also another $1.4 million from DFO in May of that year. So do you believe it was ethical to use the staff of SDTC to be the business development funding officers for the Fischerin Center that you sat on the board of, on both, that you used the staff of your own agency that you chaired to help fund government money in other ways for the other organization you established and sat on the board of?
Mr. Chair, the Fischerin Center is a non-for-profit organization. Any funding goes to support the ecosystem and its companies.
That wasn't my question. You chaired an organization that used its staff to find other government money when it was conflicted and you couldn't get money out of the thing that you chaired, the Green Slush Fund. So you used the staff to find money from other government departments who then ended up giving the Fischerin Center not $6.8 million, but $11 million. To me, that's a total abuse of your position, just for MP from Erskine Smith's information. He doesn't seem to think that's a problem. And then that center,
Point
the
of order,
Fischerin
Mr.
Center,
Chair.
the Fischerin Center then invested.
Point of order, Mr.
Just
Chair.
1 second, Mr. Perkins. Yes, Ms. Khalid.
Absolutely uncalled for. Taking
Ms.
shots
Khalid,
at
that's not a
colleagues.
point of order. And
No,
that's,
it is.
by the standards of this
genuinely-
committee, that's a pretty light poke.
Point of order.
So,
Point of order.
yes, Mr. Erskine Smith, your poke at a Conservative member was quite a lot harder than that, but I'll hear your point of order. Go ahead, please.
Well, it's actually not, Chair, because he's suggesting that I don't care about an ethics violation when I've clearly stated multiple times that I do.
The meeting's been going exceptionally well. No, Ms. Perkins, this is not a point of order. And there is a Liberal member up next, and if you feel the need to rebut what Mr. Perkins and anyone else is saying, you're free to do that. But these are not points of order. These are light pokes I'm hearing from all sides, and they're certainly well within.
I understand, yeah. Chair, but I'm on record saying I don't approve of ethics violations, and Mr. Cooper's on record saying
thank you. You made your position clear in your turn, and if you like another turn, you're welcome to speak to your whip. But these are points of debate, not points of order. Mr. Perkins, you've got about 30 seconds left.
So as a board of SDTC, you used the staff to find funding for the Verschaeren Centre, which you couldn't get from SDTC. You got twice as much from the government as you asked for. And then that centre invested in an organization that you have a financial interest in, Sandpiper, Denova, and the Bio Creators. So there is a clear link between your efforts to get money for the failed Verschaeren Centre, get that so that they could give money to a company you had a financial interest in. That's a direct conflict of interest, and it's personal benefit by you, which is what the minister set up when he appointed you and knew and was warned that you had conflicts of interest.
Mr. Verschaeren, I assume you have no
comment.
That's fine. That's fine. Up next is Ms. Bradford for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With the Auditor General's report, which is the real reason we are here and studying this today, showing that there were conflicts of interest, and the Ethics Commissioner reporting that you indeed did break the Conflict of Interest Act, how did you navigate these inherent potential conflicts of interest that you must have faced?
Mr. Chair, unlike the Auditor General report, the Ethics Commissioner did specifically review my conduct. And he found that I took what I believe to be the proper and necessary steps to manage conflicts at the time. That I was misled by incorrect legal advice, and also that I did not attempt to influence the decisions of my colleagues on the board. I accept his conclusions, including that I acted in what I genuinely thought to be compliance with the Act.
Was the purpose behind your non-recusals because you believed them to be insignificant, or because you did not see any returns, or was it simply a matter of not truly recognizing the scope and impact that you not recusing yourself from the funding decisions would have on the SDTC, the board, and on yourself?
In the majority of projects, I recused myself, but there were some that I didn't, that I abstained, but at all times I did declare. The Conflict of Interest Act basically says that you can't abstain, you have to recuse yourself. And so that procedural issue was something that I have take responsibility for.
And recusing yourself means you should actually leave the room so that you're not privy to the discussions, because your very presence could perhaps influence the decision that the board may take. Do you agree?
Yes.
Okay. Now, given your dual roles at the Verschaeren Center for Sustainability and the Mars Discovery District and the Ethics Commissioner's findings that you participated in decisions that furthered their private interests, do you acknowledge that such actions could undermine public trust in institutions like SDTC?
Again, the Ethics Commissioner did specifically review my conduct, and he found that I took what I believed to be the proper and necessary steps to manage conflicts at the time, and I was misled by incorrect legal advice, and also that I did not attempt to influence the decisions of my colleagues. I accept his conclusions, including that I acted in what I genuinely thought to be compliance with the Act.
Now, what measures do you believe should be implemented to prevent similar situations from occurring in the future? Because this has been terribly disruptive, as we've alluded to previously. So what would you suggest so that this never happens again?
I think that the recommendations of the Auditor General report are addressing some of those issues, and stronger procedures on perceived conflict, actual conflict, and potential conflict need to be established. And so I believe that those recommendations are underway and are now part of the new organization.
Now, Ms. Verchuren, we've heard a lot about how your tenure as chair of the SDTC board began. Can you please elaborate on how and when it ended?
Mr. Chair, I am just trying to remember, December 1st, 2023 was my last day with SDTC. I indicated to the minister of ISED that I would be leaving, I think, 2 weeks before, but I wanted to complete the Raymond Chabot report and recommendations of management and deliver that to the ministry, which I did, and which were accepted, and changes were made to improve processes in the organization.
So just to clarify, you advised the minister on December 2023 that you'd be leaving, or 2 weeks prior to that, you'd advise him that you would be leaving as of December 1st? I'm confused.
No, the December 1st was my last date with STTC, so I advised him that previous 2 weeks before.
Okay. And just one last thing. Can you explain how an advisory panel is different than a board with oversight of SDTC itself?
An advisory, I'm not quite sure what context that was in. Can you clarify?
Well, my first round of questions, I went through your great history of very many, roles that you've had before with government, some in international. So I'm just wondering if you could help clarify how an advisory panel's role is different than a board with oversight, which is what the SDTC had.
Mr. Chair, I'd say the big difference is an advisory panel would give advice to ministers, to prime ministers, to those that want to contribute to looking at policy and making changes to it. So an advisory panel doesn't have the same accountability as a board of directors does.
They're not
Thank
overseeing
you. I'm afraid that is the time. I'm afraid, Ms. Bradford. Beginning our fourth and final round, 6 members, various times. Mr. Brock, you have the floor for 5.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Verscheeren, going back to the appointment process, when you finally made the decision to make application after you spoke a number of times with former Liberal Minister Bains, did you actually reach out to him personally to confirm you had made the decision and you would be applying?
I'm not, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure whether I confirmed with him or one of his colleagues.
Okay, but at least when you say colleagues, you mean a member of his office, correct?
Yeah, yes.
Okay,
correct.
so there was a confirmation to his office before you made a formal application, correct?
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Unlike other worthy candidates, your appointment as chair of SDTC was definitely initiated through the PMO. Who in the Prime Minister's office did you speak with prior to your interview with the PCO?
Mr. Chair, I do not recall talking to anybody in the PMO's office.
Ever?
The PCO's office.
Ever during the process?
I do not recall, no.
Okay. Do you recall the actual interview with the PCO?
I do.
Who interviewed you?
I don't recall, but I can get back to you.
Okay. Prior to your resignation as chair in December of 23, did anyone from the PCO, the PMO, or the current minister's office or any other department official advise you against resigning?
Mr. Chair, no one advised me against resigning.
Okay. When I had the privilege of meeting with you at one of the other committee meetings for the first time, I recall how strongly against you were in terms of any sort of pushback from members to impugn your character, to impugn your integrity, and you were very defiant that there'd be absolutely no grounds by which you would resign. Ultimately, you did make that decision to resign. The allegations that you claimed were out there were simply allegations. Now they've been proven by the Ethics Commissioner. You have been found guilty by the Ethics Commissioner on 2 occasions. So why did you resign?
Mr. Chair, there was a lot of stress in the organization, a lot of stress with respect to, what was happening there at the time. And I was putting perhaps undue pressure on that.
Okay.
The CEO.
Thank you. Thank you. Since your resignation, have you had any discussions with the Prime Minister's office, the Privy Council office, or Industry Canada about which documents related to your tenure at SDTC would be withheld from Parliament?
I've not had any conversations on that matter.
Okay. Have you had any input from current board members at SDTC about your tenure, in which documents would either not be released or fully redacted or partially redacted from the view of parliamentarians?
Mr. Chair, had no conversation with anybody about withholding any documents.
You clearly are keeping abreast of what's happening here in Parliament. Parliament has been literally shut down because of the government's refusal to hand over unredacted documents, all unredacted documents, pursuant to the order of the Speaker of the House. Do you believe, and the evidence clearly has shown, that the government has chosen to supply us with thousands and thousands of pages of full redactions? Do you, as a former chair of the SDTC, believe that the redactions are an effort to shield the former and current minister from being held accountable?
Mr. Chair, that's something that I cannot comment on.
Because you don't have an answer, or you don't feel comfortable?
Mr. Chair, I disclosed all my documentation to SDTC, to the Ethics Commissioner, to the Auditor General.
Okay. And why? And these were unredacted documents that you supplied?
Correct.
Mr. Brock, I'm afraid that is the time. I know your side will have one more opportunity.
Encore
une fois, Mr. Drouin, s'il vous plaît.
Once again, Mr. Drouin, 5 minutes.
Today, and I will cede my time to Mr. Erskine Smith.
Mr. Erskine Smith, you have the floor. 5 minutes, please.
Ms. Verschuren, we had the Ethics Commissioner before us, and I asked him, in all of your review of documents, your interviewing of witnesses, the Auditor General doing the work, and then you're pursuing this further, not a single piece of evidence, not a single bit of testimony has caused you to pause and say, maybe I should refer this matter to the RCMP. And he responded to say, no, there was nothing. Put a similar question to the Auditor General when she attended to say, did you come across any evidence such that you were concerned there was criminality that should be referred to the RCMP? And she responded, in the course of our audit, we did not uncover anything that we felt was potentially criminal in nature. We leave that decision up to the RCMP. We would have referred a matter to them, and we did not in this case. And yet, even today, criminal conduct has been alleged yet again, including as against you personally. What do you make of that?
Mr. Chair, there were procedural problems that I accept that needed to be changed. There certainly weren't any indication of wrongdoing, in my opinion.
How many more times do you think we should have you back? 5 times, but I ask facetiously because 5 times is an incredible number of times for an individual to attend. We've had real wrongdoing where grocery store executives have colluded as between each other to lower the wages for low-income workers. We had them attend once. We had Pornhub executives who failed to protect women on their platforms. We had them in once. Yes, two improprieties, 2 ethics violations, and you resigned as a result of that, taking accountability, as you say. In neither case did you, in both cases, you're following a lawyer's advice. I'm at a bit of a loss why we would have individuals where there is very serious wrongdoing. We would have them attend once and we would have you attend 5 times. What do you make of that?
It's a lot of times, but I take this seriously, and it's my responsibility to respond to the committees that have asked me to be in front of them.
So I'm trying to make sense of Mr. Perkins' last round here. He says you went to SDTC for money for the Verschuren Center. You said it wasn't you, but regardless, collectively, the organization came to look for money. And the so-called green slush fund wasn't enough of a slush fund, so you couldn't get the money. So now you went somewhere else to get the money. And now I'm supposed to be concerned about that. Why am I concerned about the Verschuren Center getting money from ISED, not via SDTC?
It's hard to comment on that.
Yeah, it's hard to figure that one out. It's as if the slush fund wasn't a slush fund after all. And it's as if now we're on another fishing expedition, not in relation to STTC, but in relation to ISED funding completely unrelated to STTC. What I've learned today is that Mr. Cooper doesn't know anything about insider trading and doesn't understand the very concept. He's accused you of criminality improperly, and I wonder what he would, I wonder if he's going to say the very same things outside of the parliamentary privilege that he enjoys. And what I've learned a couple of times, and Mr. Perkins, why I get so frustrated when you engage in character assassination is, frankly, I just thought you were better. And here we have a situation where Jenny Burns looking over your shoulder, and you're acting entirely differently from the person that I expected. I thought I was going to work alongside at this committee, and yet, here we are.
You have a minute left, Mr. Urston-Smith.
I've said all I need to say, Chair.
Thank you very much. Suivant, c'est Madame Sig.
Next, Ms. Sinclair de Gagny, 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Thank you, Chair. Ms. Verschuren, I have a very specific question for you. At what time, you were still on the board of directors, so at what time did you learn that the Auditor General's office was going to conduct an investigation on SDTC? Do you have the specific date? And if you don't, if you could forward it to us, that would be much appreciated.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I think it was a couple of months earlier before because I went through the whole due diligence process with the Auditor General. So I think it was, not sure, May or June when I heard that the Auditor General is going to be investigating.
Au mois de juin 2023?
June of 2023?
Yeah.
D'accord.
I can check that.
Les dates.
Yes, please do check because the dates don't seem to work quite well. So I would like to get the specific date when you were advised, even informally. Thank you, Ms.
Pour continuer,
And to continue, in your resignation letter, Ms. Verschuren, you mentioned that you took seriously the serious allegations in regard to the SDTC's board of directors, but you defended yourself by saying you had asked for 2 studies, and the findings of the studies stated there were no problems, and that's what you quote in your letter of resignation. But today, you say you accept the findings of the Auditor General. There seems to be a big contradiction here, because between the report from Osler and the report don't have the same conclusions as that of the Auditor General. So which conclusions do you accept?
Mr. Chair, so I have been involved in the Osler study, the Raymond Chabot study, the Auditor General, and the Ethics Commissioner. So I have provided my input and documentation to all those committees. When I so the member may be right in terms of my timing of the Auditor General, but when I was, the time that I was leaving, the Raymond Chabot report had been prepared, and there were, we absolutely accepted and responded to that Raymond Chabot report and prepared a management's response to that, and basically tightened up and improve processes from the management side and the board side in terms of conflict of interest. And so that was really important to have done. So the Auditor General's report and the Ethics Commission report happened after. You're right.
Very briefly, the conclusions not be the same. Let me repeat the same question. Do you accept the findings, much more serious findings on the part of the Auditor General and the Commissioner's report as compared to the Osler report, and to a lesser degree the findings of the Raymond Chabot? Because what conclusions did you arrive at?
Certainly the Ethics Commissioner's report was on my personal, based upon my personal specific issues. The Auditor General's report is very broad in scope, extraordinarily broad. It focuses on the history of SDTC. It focuses, and it included time that I was not chair from 2017. It focuses on parts of the decisions made by management. A lot of it did. I was not part of the management team. From what I've seen in the media, it's my understanding the STTC has already adopted most of the Auditor General's recommendations.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Boulris, 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Thank you, Chair. Ms. Verschuren, at a given point in time, you went to seek legal advice from a third party on the notion of conflict of interest. In fact, you paid a lawyer. Why did you not turn to the federal government's ethics commissioner? It wouldn't have cost you a thing. Why turn to a lawyer rather than turn to the commissioner with your questions?
Mr. Chair, that lawyer did a lot of work with STTC. He was an independent from a partner in a major legal firm. So we obviously felt he was very qualified.
Mais le commissaire au conflit d'intérêts.
But the conflict of interest commissioner is also very qualified. It's his job.
Excuse me. Continuez, s'il vous plaît.
Madame Verschuren, je veux insister.
Ms. Verschuren, I want to insist the commissioner is also very qualified. It is his job.
Oui. It is his job. And I want the committee to reflect on that time. This was 3 weeks after COVID. All these companies were not receiving revenue. They were in trouble. They were seriously concerned about making payroll. And so we received that recommendation from our lawyer. Management received it. The board received that recommendation and accepted it.
There's an article in the media that reveals that you are the object of an investigation on conflict of interest. On November 20th, you resigned. That's 3 days later. That's faster than Randy Boissonnault. If you don't think you'd done anything wrong at the time, why did you resign?
Mr. Chair, I was the focus of a lot of negative press and I wanted to take the focus that negative press away from STTC, so that it could be free to move forward, and so that was the reason.
Peut-être une dernière question.
Perhaps a last question, Ms. Verschuren. You admitted earlier that indeed you confused the notion of abstaining from a vote to recusing, which runs contrary to Section 21 in the Act. So you were appointed at the head of board directors that managed hundreds of thousands of dollars. Did no one explain to you the difference between abstaining and recusing yourself?
Mr. Chair, I take responsibility for not for those sections of not following the Act. I was following the procedures that happened before I became the chair and was recommended by senior management.
Est-ce que c'est la...
So is that normal procedure to not have adequate training to make the difference according to Section 21 between abstaining and recusing? You talk about normal procedures. It seems to be very abnormal not to have the correct information.
Mr. Chair, in retrospect, if I had to do it over again, I would obviously recuse myself in every situation.
Thank you, merci beaucoup. Please, pardon me. You're welcome to. Pardon me.
Just, Mr. Chair, to add that I took the advice of a lawyer.
Yeah, pardon me. Didn't mean to cut you off. I try to allow the witnesses to have the last word in questioning. We have 2 more members remaining. Mr. Cooper, you're up for 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Chair, despite Mr. Erskine Smith's profound ignorance of the rules of the Ontario Securities Commission, Ms. Verschuren, as someone who served as a director on publicly traded companies, you will be aware that under the rules relating to insider trading and self-dealing, directors cannot buy and sell shares in the company days after a public announcement. Rather, they can only do so during limited windows outside of the quarterly financial reporting periods. And yet, the conflict of interest rules for the SDTC board, which violated the Act, allowed board members to buy and sell securities within 3 days of a funding announcement. I ask you again, why didn't you fix the policy? Because it sure sounds like a good deal for board members.
Mr. Chair, again, I followed the procedures that were established at the time that I joined that board, reviewing these things were the responsibility of management and
so you take no responsibility. Now, I'll ask you this. What constituted a public announcement? Was it just a press release posted on the SDTC website? Is that a public announcement?
Mr. Chair, I don't recall.
Yeah. Well, if Mr. Erskine Smith wants to dispute whether it's technically insider trading or akin to insider trading, it certainly is a racket, it certainly is corruption, and it certainly is a very different standard than the 5 years that staff members at SDTC had to wait before they could do what you permitted yourself to do as a member of the SDTC board. But speaking of law breaking during the time that you were the chair of the SDTC board, your fellow board member, Andre-Lise Matteau, admitted when she appeared before this committee, Ms. Matteau being a very close friend of the Minister of the Environment, Stephen Guilbeault, that the board funneled $10.4 million from SDTC to companies that she had interests in through her investment firm, Cycle Capital. How did you allow that to happen?
again, Mr. Chair, this was part of the decision-making process in terms of the COVID payments. And
No, Ms. Verschuren, $10.4 million went into companies that Ms. Mateau had an interest in, and these were not COVID-related payments. Ms. Mateau left the room, in fact, when the monies went out the door, but 12.2 of the Act states very clearly, no director shall profit or gain any income or acquire any property from the foundation or its activities. The Act wasn't complied with, just as the conflict of interest policy that you had in place didn't comply with that section of the Act. So again, I put it to you, how did you allow $10.4 million unlawfully to be funneled into Andre Lise Mateau's companies?
Mr. Chair, the process was the presentations were made to the Project Review Committee. The Project Review Committee would recommend putting them forward. This was a process that I believe was the same as before I was the chair. So I think it was.
Well, Ms. Verschuren, 12.2 of the Act is pretty clear. I just read it to you. What part of that did you not understand?
Go ahead, Mr. Cooper, ask again.
I asked,
I'll give you time, ask again.
I said section 12.2 of the Act is clear. I read it to you. What part of it did you not understand when $10.4 million was funneled into Andre Lise Mateau's companies while you were the chair and sat on the board?
As chair,
You have bothered to have acquainted yourself with a very fundamental component of the Act.
Mr. Chair, I certainly recognize, as chair, I felt that I was following all the policies and procedures and conflicts of interest associated with STTC's.
Well, policies and procedures. Ed Vandenberg, who was providing you counsel, was also being remunerated while he served as a member of the SDTC Council, and while you were the chair, he was voting to appoint 5 members to the board that you were the chair of an improperly constituted council. Did you ask any questions about that?
Mr. Vandenberg provided legal advice and provided service to the STTC board and to management. And
he was making unlawful appointments to the board while you were the chair. And you just didn't care? You just turned a blind eye to that too? You know, it's conflicts of interest, it's unlawful appointments, it's self-dealing,
Mr. Cooper,
akin to insider trading.
That is your time, Mr. Cooper.
On and on it goes.
Mr. Cooper, that is your time. I'm going to turn now to Mr. Erskine Smith. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please, sir.
Thanks very much. I mean, I don't know about anyone else. I just heard a tantrum from a colleague who said, I called it insider trading. I was wrong. I'm now going to call it something else, but it's akin to insider trading. But let's get to the actual point of this, Ms. Verschuren. You've been found to be subject to an ethics violation in relation to a COVID blanket approval in relation to NR Store, and you've been found to be subject to an ethics violation in relation to the abstention rather than the recusal with respect to the Verschuren Center's dealings, where there was no financial interest in play. So, did you buy shares? Did you invest in STTC companies within 3 days of a public announcement?
No, I did not.
Okay, so surely Mr. Cooper must be onto something. It's not just a fishing expedition. Surely we take this thing more seriously than that. So is there any evidence available to you or to anyone on the board of SDTC where this did take place to your knowledge?
I certainly have no evidence of that.
Yeah, I must have missed it because I know Mr. Cooper wouldn't just ask questions and accuse you of criminal conduct and accuse the board of self-dealing without some evidence. So I must have missed it, and I apologize for that. What evidence did Mr. Cooper present to you today to suggest that you or anyone on the board actually engaged in self-dealing?
I did not see any evidence of that.
Mr. Cooper didn't provide any evidence. He's accused you of criminal conduct, and he provided you no evidence of it?
No.
That seems surprising. I can't imagine a parliamentarian would conduct themselves like that. My last question is in relation to your relationships with other members of the board, because I should have mentioned one last fishing expedition that I've seen. It hasn't come up today in entirely the same way, but I have seen it come up. There's this idea that there's sort of a quid pro quo, that you approve mine, I'll approve yours. Who compensated you to approve on the board? Who compensated you to approve projects that they had a financial stake in, but where they properly recused themselves?
I absolutely, this was something that I took very seriously. I didn't talk to any board members about any of their projects. The Ethics Commission did not find any evidence of that as well. But that was really something that I really respected and just didn't talk about projects at that level.
So the Ethics Commissioner found in answer to questions when he attended last at our committee, he said, it was clear to me that this was a fund that was, let's be kind, sloppily organized and operated, but there was nothing illegal from the evidence that I was presented with such that I would have said, hey, let's just stop right now and refer it to the RCMP. So would you agree that there was sloppy record keeping in relation to conflicts of interest? You would say that there was mismanagement of record keeping and conflicts of interest? Would you think that's a fair assessment?
Mr. Chair, one of the things I did before I left was really try to develop a better standard in terms of conflict of interest reporting, in terms of perceived conflicts, existing conflicts, and potential conflicts. And so that needed to be improved. There's no question about that. And it has been improved.
And I suppose I've got a minute left, Chair. So I would just ask, I didn't get maybe a clear answer to my question previously. Maybe I didn't ask it in as blunt a way as I could have. But you have served in many capacities for different prime ministers of different political stripes. And you've said in one of your previous answers that it's not about particular parties, it's about service to the country. And I think it's a good thing that you resigned in the wake of an ethics commissioner's report, and you said, I'm going to take accountability for this. I think that's an appropriate course of action. Why in the world would someone like yourself ever serve on a board under a Pierre Poilievre government that is so engaged in character assassination? Why in the world would any serious person want to contribute their time when these folks just deal in absolute outright character assassination absent any evidence?
I would say, Mr. Chair, that this is I have myself into a situation that I never would have expected in my life. And I have worked with Liberal governments, I've worked with NDP governments, I've worked with Conservative governments, and I think, I think it's really important to want input from people that perhaps have experience like me and others to help run organizations. And so, I think Canada needs people that are independent and can contribute themselves to improve operations and get involved in institutions and be on boards. I think that's really critical. So yeah, it's something that I worry about as a Canadian.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you, Ms. Verschuren, for your testimony and participation in relation to the study. I know there's been some documents that you've agreed to submit in terms of timelines and just some questions.
Yeah.
If you could submit those to the clerk, that would be greatly appreciated. And on that note, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.